They almost didn't put windows in trains, you know. The statement came to him like dust blown lazily in the warm thermals of places better left. Some men were blue, some were red, and some men were gray, and as the angry seas of political change roiled, pitching those adherents to the spectrums of primary colors to and fro like the forlorn sailors of yesteryear, the gray men swam beneath like sharks in the tranquil waters of the deep. "Albert," said Languedoc wanly, as he nodded to greet the gray man. Once the press conference had ended, Languedoc had retreated to his office to lick his wounds. He could feel the eyes of the staff burrowing into his back as he had gone, as they were all smart enough to know that the press conference had been a quiet pronouncement of usurpation on the part of the vice president. But all would be quiet until the full force of impact was felt, like a vehicle accelerating to meet a deer frozen by the headlights on a quiet back lane. "She's a real poisonous old goat, isn't she?" Albert continued thoughtfully. "You can really pick your winners, can't you?" "What was it that you said about a train?" "It was just something I read once in a magazine on an airplane. The first people to build passenger trains were afraid that the sight of scenery moving by at such a fantastic rate might frighten the weaker-minded passengers into insanity." "Oh?" prompted Languedoc. He had known Albert long enough to know that he enjoyed elongating his speech with twisting allegories. "Well, sometimes I wonder if they weren't right." "Do you?" inquired Languedoc, hit with a thin smile of bemusement, as he was still relishing the warm numbness of apathy that had crept over him. Not all problems had productive solutions, which is why they had hung the Christ from nails. He was like a lizard basking in the sun. "Well, it might simply be that the speed of travel had a delayed rather than an immediate effect," speculated Albert wistfully, "the rapidity of departure gradually eroding the human mind. By the age of 65, 1 in 3 Americans will have experienced some form of degenerative cognitive decline." "I'm afraid you've lost me." "What I'm trying to say, in my own beleaguered fashion," lectured Albert coyly, with the scripted and vaguely psychopathic insight that seemed endemic to the intelligence community, "is that the deal with Kaplan is off. You will not be boarding a plane to Switzerland tomorrow afternoon, and under no circumstances will the Vice President ascend to that venerated position which she desperately craves." Languedoc remained silent, as this was not intended to be a conversation. Albert powerfully resembled a pot-bellied pig, with his bald pate, protruding belly, and bulbous nose, and whenever Languedoc looked at him, he was reminded of the lurid true crime stories that involved serial murderers dumping the bodies of their victims into hog pens for disposal. All of the president's men had been neatly arranged, like soldiers on the parade ground, and they were nervous, like horses that have caught the scent of gunpowder. Billy McIntosh was the president's Secretary of State, and he had taken to running the cabinet meetings as the president's attendance had at first become sporadic and then sank into perpetual absence. The secretary had not spoken with the first citizen for over 4 months. Billy did not like surprises, and like many at the State Department, he had been attracted to it by the formulaic and uninspired drudgery which, when faithfully applied, generated a monumental, and compounding return on investment. "When will the president arrive?" asked the Secretary of Energy. Billy creased his brow and narrowed his eyes stoically as he peered from the head of the table and addressed the question. "Like yourselves," he began, in the measured form of the parliamentary method, "I was informed that the president required our presence this morning, and so I've done my utmost to ensure my presence here today. Unfortunately," the secretary then paused to look to either side of the table, noting that many of the seats were empty, "a number of our colleagues were unable to make it this morning, due to the short notice that was given. However, I believe that the best course of action would be to continue after the fashion which we have adopted. Therefore, I move that we begin with the discussion of—" But at that moment the door to the conference room flew open, cutting off the secretary's speech like an axe glancing through cordwood, as the president burst through the door like a man struggling in from out of the rain, and then roughly closed it behind him, punctuating his clumsy entrance with a rude bang. Every eye in the room was fixed on him, as the president stood with his back resting against the door, his chest heaving up and down as though he had just run a foot race. The whole world was quiet, and for that moment he stared them down, his face flushed, his hair plugs pointing haphazardly at the sky as if praying for rain. The president then straightened up, seeming to recover himself somewhat, and with one hand he smoothed his hair into a matted clump. "Mr. President!" exclaimed Secretary McIntosh incredibly, and then he leapt from his seat, as though the cushion had suddenly warmed several thousand degrees. The rest of the room followed suit, each eager to show the respect for the office had not waned. Be seated," grumbled the president absently, with a wave of his hand. "Please, sir, take your seat," offered McIntosh hurriedly, as he suddenly found his position extraordinarily precarious. The president again dismissed him with a wave of his hand, and began pacing the room, parallel to the conference table. Those with seats facing away from him wrenched their lumbar spines as they twisted to look at him. Languedoc quietly entered the room, and Billy whirled again, his face flooding with relief when he saw Languedoc. "Andre, what's going on?" But Languedoc said nothing. He simply closed the door, folded his arms across his chest, and stood against the back wall, his eyes unwavering from the president. The president seemed oblivious to them all until he abruptly wheeled to face his audience. "I am the President of these United States, and united we stand," proclaimed the president forcefully, as he jabbed his finger in the general direction of the cabinet, his eyes shining with the dull gleam of headlights which have been dimmed by layers of use. "The world has changed. I have changed. We are rot. We are ruined," snarled the president, as saliva escaped his mouth in a ropey chain. "And I will not rest until those who seek to undermine the dignity of this office, of my office," the president thumped his chest, which produced a wet slap, "are forced to make a full account. And it has come to my attention," stated the president, as he crossed the room and began to pace the other side, "that there are some, even in this room today, who would displace me from my position, but I assure you that this will not happen." The president then stopped and faced the table, pursing his lips as he braced his body for the final explosion. "I am not made of glass. I am not made of glass. The world is made of glass, and I am the heat that smelts it." And with that the president rushed from the room like a drunk fleeing a bar after he has sworn off liquor.